true horror stories. The digital display on the hotel phone showed room 323 calling for the third time that night. But when I answered, all I heard was breathing on the other end. The guest registry showed that room had been empty for 6 days. This is what happened during my shift at the Riverside Hotel. My name is Marcus, and I was 24 years old when I took the overnight front desk position at a mid-sized hotel on the outskirts of Portland. The job was simple enough: check guests in and out, handle any maintenance calls, keep the lobby clean, and make sure nothing went wrong during the quiet hours between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. Most nights were uneventful, almost boring. I would catch up on laundry for the hotel linens, reorganize the storage closets, and once everything was done, I would sit behind the front desk watching videos on my phone to pass the time. The hotel itself was unremarkable, a 4-story building with 80 rooms, mostly occupied by business travelers and the occasional family passing through on road trips. The architecture was standard, built sometime in the 1980s with that distinctive bland corporate style. Beige carpets, off-white walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed constantly in the hallways. Nothing about the place suggested anything unusual. I had been working there for about 3 months when this incident occurred. Oh, it was a Tuesday night in late July, one of those humid summer evenings where the air conditioning struggled to keep up with the heat. The hotel was only about half full, maybe 40 rooms occupied, which was typical for a weeknight. My shift had started normally. I checked in 2 late arrivals, handled a maintenance request about a television remote that wasn't working, and by midnight I had finished all my assigned tasks. The lobby was quiet, just the sound of the ice machine down the hall and the occasional car passing on the street outside. I was sitting in the back office, a small cramped room behind the front desk where we kept supplies and the main computer system, scrolling through videos on my phone when the phone started ringing. The hotel phone system had a digital display that showed which room was calling. It was a helpful feature that let me know immediately if it was an internal call from a guest or an external call from outside. When I glanced at the screen, I saw it was an internal call from room 323. I picked up the receiver and gave my standard greeting. "Front desk, how may I help you?" There was no response. I waited, listening carefully, but heard absolutely nothing. No background noise, no breathing, just silence. After about 10 seconds, I repeated myself a bit louder, thinking maybe the guest hadn't heard me. Still nothing. I assumed it was a butt dial, or maybe someone had picked up the phone by accident and walked away, so I hung up and went back to my phone. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. I looked at the display and felt a small flicker of irritation when I saw it was room 323 again. I picked up with the same greeting, already anticipating silence, and that's exactly what I got. But this time, I waited longer before hanging up. I pressed the receiver closer to my ear, listening intently for any sound that might explain the call. That's when I heard it. A small sigh barely audible, like someone exhaling slowly right into the mouthpiece. The sound sent a chill down my spine. It was deliberate, intimate in a way that felt intrusive. I found myself almost shouting into the phone. "Hello, can I help you? Is everything all right?" The line went dead immediately. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart beating faster than it should have been. Something about those calls felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't just that someone wasn't speaking, it was the quality of the silence, the purposefulness of that sigh. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a guest was drunk or playing games. Maybe there was a problem with the phone system, creating phantom calls. I made a mental note to mention it to my manager in the morning and forced myself to focus on something else. About 20 minutes later, the bell at the front desk rang. I walked out from the back office to find a man in his late 40s standing at the counter. He was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, and he looked annoyed but not angry. He told me there was someone making noise in the room next to his, banging on the walls and being generally disruptive. He said it had been going on for about 15 minutes and was making it impossible to sleep. I apologized immediately and told him I would make a note of it for my manager to address in the morning. I explained that there wasn't much I could do about noise complaints at this hour unless it was severe enough to warrant calling the police, which this didn't seem to be. I asked him for his room number so I could document the complaint properly. He said he was staying in room 325. The moment he said that number, I felt my stomach drop. 325, right next door to 323. I must have paused or made some expression because the guest immediately noticed. He asked if everything was all right, looking at me with concern. I forced a smile and assured him everything was fine, that I would handle it. He seemed satisfied and mentioned he was going outside for a cigarette before heading back to his room. As soon as he walked out the front entrance, I moved quickly to the computer behind the desk. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled up the guest registry and searched for room 323. What I found made my blood run cold. There was no one checked into that room. According to the system, room 323 had been vacant for the past 6 days. No reservations scheduled, no guest currently staying there, completely empty. But someone had called from that room twice, and now someone was making enough noise in there to disturb the guest next door. I stood there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could the system be wrong? Could someone have broken into the room somehow? But how would they have gotten past me? And why would they just sit in there, calling the front desk and banging on walls? I needed to do something to distract myself from the growing sense of unease, so I started straightening up the lobby. I organized the tourist brochures on the rack near the entrance, wiped down the counter, checked that all the coffee supplies were stocked for the morning. I was in the middle of folding some newspapers when the alarm panel behind the front desk started beeping. Every room in the hotel had a smoke detector connected to a central alarm system. There was a digital panel behind the desk that displayed all 80 rooms, and when a detector was triggered, it would show which specific room had the issue. I looked at the panel, already knowing somehow what I would see. Room 323. The alarm wasn't indicating smoke, just that it had been triggered, probably by the guest reaching up and pressing the test button or pulling the detector off the ceiling. But there was no guest in 323. I stood there for a long moment, debating what to do. Every protocol said I needed to go check on any triggered alarm immediately. But everything in my instincts was screaming at me not to go up there. Finally, I grabbed the master keyring from its hook and forced myself to move toward the stairwell. The elevator would have been faster, but somehow taking the stairs felt safer, like I was maintaining more control. I climbed to the 3rd floor, the stairs creaking under my feet, the fluorescent lights flickering, occasionally in that way old buildings do. The 3rd floor hallway was empty and silent, just the hum of the ice machine and the distant sound of a television from one of the occupied rooms. Room 323 was about halfway down the hall. The door looked exactly like every other door. Beige paint, brass numbers, the little peephole catching the hallway light. I stood in front of it for several seconds, listening. No sound came from inside. I knocked loudly and announced myself. "Hotel maintenance, I need to check your alarm." Nothing. I pulled out the master key and slid it into the lock. The mechanism clicked, and I pushed the door open slowly. The air that rushed out was freezing cold. It hit me like a physical thing, this wave of frigid air that had no business existing in July. The hotel had air conditioning, but it was struggling in this heat, and most rooms were barely cool enough to be comfortable. This room was like stepping into a refrigerator. I could see my breath in the air. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on. The room was completely standard. One queen bed, neatly made, a small desk with a television, bathroom visible through an open door. Everything was in perfect order, like housekeeping had just finished preparing it. But the temperature was impossible. I walked quickly to the smoke detector on the ceiling and saw that it was still attached, undisturbed. The alarm must have reset itself. I stood in the center of that freezing room, looking around for any explanation. The windows were closed. The air conditioning unit wasn't running. There was no reason for this temperature. That's when I noticed something that made my heart race even faster. The phone on the nightstand, the one that had called me twice, was off the hook. The receiver was lying on the bed, not hung up properly, as if someone had just set it down mid-conversation. I didn't touch it. I didn't touch anything. I backed out of the room, pulled the door closed, heard the lock click into place, and then I ran. I didn't walk. I ran down that hallway, took the stairs 2 at a time, and didn't stop until I was back behind the front desk with my heart pounding and my hands shaking. The rest of my shift passed without incident. The guest from room 3:25 came back from his smoke and went to bed without mentioning any more noise. The phone didn't ring again. The alarm didn't go off. When my replacement arrived at 7 in the morning, I told him everything that had happened. He listened with a skeptical expression and then laughed, saying I had been watching too many horror movies. I never worked another night shift at that hotel. I requested to be moved to day shifts only, and when my manager asked why, I told him I had a scheduling conflict. But what she discovered next was even more disturbing. A few weeks later, I was talking to one of the housekeeping staff during my break. I mentioned room 323 casually, asking if there was anything unusual about it. She gave me a strange look and asked why I wanted to know. I told her about my experience that night. Her face went pale, and she told me that housekeepers avoided cleaning that room whenever possible. She said the temperature was always wrong, freezing in summer and stifling in winter. She said sometimes they would finish cleaning it, close the door, and then come back an hour later to find the furniture rearranged or the bed unmade again. She said management knew about it but refused to acknowledge it. They kept the room available for booking, but she noticed they rarely actually assigned guests to it. I asked if anyone had ever died in that room. She didn't know, but she said she wouldn't be surprised. I quit that job about a month later. I told everyone it was because I found better pay elsewhere, which was true. But the real reason was that every time I walked past the third floor on my way to anywhere in that hotel, I felt watched. I still think about that night sometimes, about those phone calls with nothing but breathing and that single sigh, about the guest complaining of noise from an empty room, about that impossible cold and the phone receiver left off the hook. I've tried to find information about the hotel's history, but there's nothing unusual in any public records. No deaths, no incidents, nothing to explain what I experienced. But I know what I felt in that room. Something was in there, something that wanted to be noticed, that was reaching out in the only ways it could. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I wonder if it's still calling the front desk, still waiting for someone to pick up, still sighing into the silence, hoping for an answer.